Hello students, welcome to class. We shall be looking at the continuation of cell and its environment, where we firstly discussed about the two mechanisms of cell and its environment is osmosis and diffusion. And in this lesson we shall be observing the other mechanisms through which cell reacts with its environment. And the first thing to be discussed there is plasmolysis. So what is plasmolysis? Plasmolysis is the process in which cells lose water in an hypertonic solution. When we talk about hypertonic solution, that's when the amount of solute is greater than the solvent. So it is a typical response of plant cells exposed to hyperosmotic stress. So, and this plasmolysis can be said to be what? An outward movement of water from living cell when they are placed in hypertonic solution. So in that aspect, when a cell is placed in a hypertonic solution, they begin to lose water outside, to the extent that when they begin to lose water out, they shrink. Looking at the diagram here, looking at the cell membrane, the plasma membrane and the cell wall, because it was placed in an hypertonic solution of NaCl, which is sodium chloride. So, because the concentration was high compared to the solvent, the cell wall begin to shrink. So invariably, the water in the content or the water of the cell is removed out. So that's why it was said that plasmolysis is the outward movement or flow of water from living cell when they are placed in hypertonic solution. And when they are placed in hypertonic solution, what is a resultant of the cell? They shrink. So looking at this diagram also, the cell in a normal isotonic solution, they are a normal cell. But when placed in hypertonic solution, the cell membrane they shrink together. So that is the aspect of plasmolysis. And secondly, now we'll talk about turgidity. So in this aspect of turgidity, what do you understand by turgidity? So turgidity is a state of a cell in which the cell wall is fully expanded due to the absorption of water, which is the process of endomeiosis, up to the last limit. So in this aspect, it talks about what? The intake of water by the cell. So it is a condition in which cell absorb plenty of water up to a point where the cell is fully stretched. So in this aspect, it talks about what? The amount of water that enters the cell is greater than the amount of water that leaves the cell. Are we together? So when the amount of water that enters the cell is greater than the amount of water that leaves the cell, what happens to the cell? It becomes what? It becomes turgid, it becomes swollen. So which is what? The process of turgidity. Now looking at the picture we have here, in a normal cell, which is in an isotonic solution, the cell looks normal. But if the cell is now placed in an hypotonic solution, whereby there is what? The movement of water. So once there is the continuous absorption of water by the cell, it results to what? To the cell to be fully stretched. So at this point, the cell is said to be what? To be turgid. So turgidity occurs when a cell is placed in an hypotonic solution, and as a result of that, the cytoplasm solution is stronger than the water, and the cell absorb water and they become turgid, or they become swollen. But the reason why the cell did not burst, why? Because we are referring to what? To a plant cell, and the reason is a plant cell, they have cell wall. So because of the presence of cell wall, it prevents the cell from bursting. No matter how much they are stretched, no matter how much they are swollen, due to the absorption of water, the cell do not burst. Why? Because of the presence of cell wall. So when the amount of water that is taken in by a cell is greater than the amount of water that is expelled out or that is removed out from the cell, what happens? The cell becomes swollen, the cell becomes turgid, which is a term called turgidity. Unlike in plasmolysis, where we talk about a cell is being placed in hypertonic solution, so the cell shrinks. But in turgidity, the cell is placed in an hypotonic solution and the cell absorbs water and it becomes swollen. So looking at this picture, so we have the root cell. So when the root cell is placed in an hypotonic solution in the soil, it absorbs water. So this one happens most especially during the rainy season, when the amount of water in the soil is higher than the mineral nutrients. So the cell absorbs more water and the leaf becomes swollen, which is very particular in herbaceous plants. And then we now talk about flaccidity. So what is flaccidity? Flaccidity, when a plant cell is placed in hypertonic solution, the plant cell loses water and the protoplasm of the cell is pulled away from the cell wall. So let me just break it down there. So it talks about what is a condition in which plants lose water to their surrounding faster than they can absorb. So when plant loses water to their surrounding faster than they can absorb. So this talks about the amount of water expelled is greater than the amount of water gained in. So when the amount of water that is expelled, or when the amount of water that is released out is greater than the amount of water that the plant cell has absorbed, so the cell becomes flaccid. So when plant loses more water, it is said to be what? It is said to be flaccid. So flaccidity normally occurs when there is no water in the soil or during drought. So unlike in the aspect of turgidity, that happens during excess water in the soil. But in the case of flaccidity, when there is little or no amount of water in the soil or during drought, the cell lacks the intake of water and the cell loses out water through the process of transpiration. And when I talk about transpiration, it is the loss of water from the plant through water vapor to the atmosphere. So the amount of water that is lost from the plant is greater than the amount of water that is gained in or that is absorbed in. So the cell becomes flaccid. So such continuous loss of water to the surrounding may cause the plant cell to wilt or even die if it continues for a very long time. And then we want to move on to the last one, which is hemolysis. Anytime you hear the word hemo, you're referring to the word blood, just like we have hemoglobin. So what is hemolysis? It's defined as the process by which a red blood cell, and the red blood cell can also be called erythrocyte or the corpuscle, becomes split or burst as a result of too much water passing into it. So when the red blood cell or the erythrocytes, when they become split or burst as a result of too much water passing into it, so that tells you that this hemolysis, it only happens to red blood cell, which is an animal cell. So when this red blood cells or the erythrocytes, when they are placed in hypotonic solution and they begin to take in more water, they begin to absorb more water, what happens to the red blood cell? The red blood cell becomes swollen. Altogether, the red blood cell, what, they become swollen, and at a point in time they burst. Why? Because they do not have cell wall. So because they do not have cell wall, they only possess cell membrane, and we know that cell membrane, they are what? They are flexible. Do you get that? Cell wall, cell membrane, they are flexible. So when it is overstretched, they burst. So when the amount of water that is being taken in by the red blood cell, when the red blood cell is placed in an hypotonic solution, the red blood cell absorbs more water, and when they absorb more water, it happens to be that the red blood cell, they become more swollen, and as a result, because of the presence of cell membrane, they burst. So this situation will occur when a red blood cell is placed in a weaker or hypotonic solution, where the red blood cell takes in water and becomes swollen and may even burst. So the red blood cell, they burst when they are placed in an hypotonic solution, because they will gain in more water. So as a result of the entrance of more water, as a result of absorbing more water, they become swollen to the point that the red blood cell burst. I hope you've learned a lot from this lesson, which is cell and its environment, where we've talked about plasmolysis, turgidity, flaccidity, and hemolysis. Till we see in our next class. Bye for now.